Hello, my name is Sarah Donnelly. Thank you for joining us on our third episode of the Volusia County Uncovered podcast. As always, I am here with my co-host, Lori Becker. How's it going this morning, Lori?
Hey, Sarah. Super excited about what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, I am too. The City Council discussed 9 stormwater projects and improvements that will be underway in the next decade to come. We'll just go ahead and hop right into it.
Yes. This meeting on Tuesday was all about Stormwater Plan 101. I mean, everything you wanted to know about canals and ditches and ponds and weirs, all different types of new vocabulary came out of this particular meeting. Really taught me a lot, about the direction that we're going with stormwater flooding. And I have a lot of faith now in the city, especially with Juno Reed, the engineer, who presented the plan. And, one of the takeoffs that I have from this is definitely talking about the old city. Because personally, I think that when we're talking about stormwater, particularly in the Port Orange area, recognizing that there are plenty of other areas in Volusia County that we're going to talk about as well, we are really facing a situation where I feel the old city is drowning. I feel the old city of Port Orange, when I moved here in the 1980s, which was mostly east of Nova, is taking the brunt of this. It really is. And if you look at these projects that they've presented, most of them are affecting what I consider the old city, which is east of Nova. And so this is the direction that we're going to try and, fix some of the flooding issues. And I'm really happy that we're able to finally get to this point with this plan that the city promised us 6 months ago. I mean, here we are, right?
We've been waiting for this meeting. I was very pleased with all the information that came out of the meeting. I encourage residents to find that meeting on YouTube. It provided a lot of resources. And another awesome point, this is a regional plan. This is not just the city of Port Orange.
Right.
The city of Port Orange, throughout years to come, as we embark on these 9 stormwater projects, will be having to collaborate with state departments, federal departments, at the local level, other cities in our county.
Right. And so, we also kind of need to remember, I know we are focusing a lot on Port Orange, but we have to remember that the outfall in Port Orange is the greatest. It is the greatest. It comes from the Ormond, down the canals, the B12, the Nova, and it all dumps right into Rose Bay.
We have established that. I think that's great to note because Port Orange is the funnel of the system.
Right. And so when you talk about the vulnerability assessment that the city had to comply with, like the county got together with all the cities, had meetings to decide, where the money needs to go. So that vulnerability assessment was $300,000 was basically dished out to cities to do the studies they need to be able to come up with the dollar figure they need to be able to allocate funds for these projects. And so it all goes back to, it's a process. It's a process that we have to follow. City, local government has no choice but to follow that. And when you think about Port Orange, you think about population explosion is where I tend to go with the city of Port Orange. So in the 1970s, there was only 3,000 people that lived in Port Orange. If you look at the current census, 3,000 people. And then in the 80s, there was this huge migration. And now there's 18,000 people living in the city of Port Orange. And so at that point, 54% of the building began. And a lot of it was still on the east side of Nova. And so these are the areas, once again, we're talking about where the city did not plan for a stormwater plan to, release all the water when we had influx of storms, because they hadn't had a big storm since 1920. So they certainly were not going to expect that 14 to 25 inches of rain was going to drop in 2025. So, but all I'm trying to get at is the mass building that began in the 1980s due to the migration of people moving into Port Orange and the fast building that went on in the 80s and 90s. We built, Sleepy Hollow is one of those plans, right? Sugar Forest, one of those plans. Sweetwater Hills, South Winds, those are all between 1970 and 1990 projects.
These were neighborhoods that were built prior to when we had regulations and code. So therefore, these neighborhoods were built without stormwater regulations, period. So no wonder we see certain neighborhoods like Sleepy Hollow really suffering from flooding.
Right. I mean, because that Sleepy Hollow was built right next to Port Orange's first shopping center, our first Publix, right on Nova Road there. And so Sleepy Hollow got built behind there. And there was no retention pond, nowhere for the water to go, no storage for the water. They're relying on a ditch behind Publix.
So we really want to highlight how in 1990, that's really the key year here. Port Orange established their specific design criteria for stormwater regulations. However, before that, 54% of homes were constructed. As you were saying, we received in the 80s this massive population influx. I think at the time it was important to take the funding and to put it into recreational use for people of the city to enjoy the amenities that we have.
Right. A lot of people will not disagree with you on that. They think a lot of that money was misappropriated instead of putting it more towards stormwater infrastructure.
The misappropriation of funding needed to be appropriated to stormwater because of the lack thereof, again, back in the 80s, back before November of 1990 when we had these regulations.
We realized that I don't care whether you call it Mother Nature, I don't care if you call it climate change, I don't care if you call it neglect of the city. We have to move forward and we have to start taking care of our old city. Because you know what? This is where the city of Port Orange wants to be. They want to be on the river front. They built this beautiful park. That property was taken by public domain, took down, the old Sweetwater, and now we're getting ready to build the Bristol Apartments, which is going to be huge. And so clearly the city wants Destination Port Orange to be on the riverfront. So do we have to get control of stormwater on Ridgewood? Absolutely. Is it enough of a berm to stop water from flooding the old city? No. It's not. And so that's why there are some projects in the Portona area. There's only like 3. There's like the Commonwealth project. There's the Virginia Avenue project. And then there's the Portona project. But the problem is most of those projects will only take care of minimal amount of homes. And that is the situation that the city is facing right now with trying to prioritize these projects.
The real estate in Port Orange it's so important, as you bring up, Lori. People do want to be in that destination part, which is east of Ridgewood Avenue.
Yeah. I definitely think that if they want to save the old city, they're going to have to make some major improvements. And even if that is as far back as Madeline Pepper Hill project, which was the number 1 project on that list, by the way, and will serve 400 residents if it is successful, and it is in 2 phases, and it is expensive, and it is part of the regional plan where state legislature is already given the go because there is a design in place. It's going to planning, and hopefully it will roll out in January. But keep in mind that is related to the Nova Canal, building a huge storage pond on Madeline with 8,000 feet of enclosed pipe that is going to run all the way to the Halifax. So they are basically encompassing fixing the old city problems by pushing the water from Nova all the way to Halifax. I just hope that's going to be successful.
And it's not a solution to just acquire more homes in the city to be able to use them for stormwater. I really like the exchange that Juneau and Mayor Stiltner had where they discussed the real estate for stormwater. And what was stated was that you would need to acquire 50 homes in order to benefit another 100 because in a given area, 30% of any neighborhood would need to be acquired in order to benefit the rest of the homes when we're talking about stormwater regulations.
Right. Well, that just brings us back to the Elevate Florida program, which is the Florida Department of Emergency Management Plan. It seems easier to acquire properties, take them down. We have an empty lot, raise a property, elevate, that's fine. But you have to have a bunch of properties together to raise. So is it going to be easier to do that and try and save some homes a little bit cheaper that way, and also the residents have to contribute to that? Or are they going to put in, the $15 million they need to go ahead and save 400 homes? So that to me is a sustainable project. I think that is good. But again, that is a regional project, and that is going to require a lot of money, and that money has to come from somewhere.
The timeliness of these projects really depends on other agencies and not just our own. So we are really going to be looking at the city to come together with the county. I know Reed Foley talked about our corrugated metal pipe and how they have successfully secured funding, and that kind of goes back to this old city idea. Mm-hmm. We've got corrugated metal pipe under the ground.
25 miles of it.
That needs to be replaced.
Retrofitted, which is one of the things that Engineer Reed mentioned, which I thought was a good idea.
One thing I thought was bizarre was if they put $1 million into the CMP project and the replacement of it, it would take 10 years, 10 to 15 years to complete.
Right. I mean, there's other projects. So, back to the funding again. So this Transform 386. So Volusia County received an allocation of about $330 million. It's basically a community development block grant. And this is to help mitigate devastating storms, flooding events, such, Hurricane Ian and whatnot. So really important to understand that this money is a big part of the recovery for restoration, for infrastructure, housing, how it relates to our economic revitalization and the mitigation of the most impacted areas. So a lot of people are probably saying, well, my neighborhood is most impacted. Well, there's stuff happening on the west side of the county too. We cannot ignore the fact that they have basins there as well that are overflowing. We can't forget that the St. Johns River is constantly in high tide now. So there are lots of other problems with the St. Johns water management that the county is trying to deal with. It isn't just all about Port Orange. And when I think about the old city, again, trying to save the old city, I think about Daytona Beach. I think about Beach Street and the millions and millions of dollars that they put into Beach Street, and it still floods. They still have problems. The river is going to rise, so they're still flooding. We're probably going to flood. Riverwalk at some point probably will take water. So this is an ongoing fluid problem that we're going to continue to have in Volusia County.
It's a fact that our stormwater system is tidally influenced, tidally affected. I really like how you bring up the point that this is not just a Port Orange issue.
Right, South Daytona, Reed Canal. Okay, so everything, that's their outfall to the Halifax River. Is the Nova Canal influenced? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That is a huge canal on Reed Canal. That's all tied in. So the regional plan is to get the money for the entire region and be able to take whatever piece you need into your city to be able to restructure. And so, that's what this vulnerability assessment is all about.
Correct.
Apparently it's about 75% complete. I did attend a couple of meetings, and there are some dates set, I think sometime in July, to move forward. So that's why we're behind on projects, because the vulnerability assessment, which basically is an exposure analysis. It tells us what gets wet, okay? And it tells us how can we stop getting these areas wet. And once those assessments are done, then they can pinpoint and obviously put all these studies together, which, by the way, the Kimberly Horn, I believe, is the study engineers that put all this together with the City of Port Orange, and they seem to have done a pretty good job.
Mr. Reed let us know that we will miss the grant cycle this year for the Resilient Florida program, so there are things called grant cycles. The vulnerability assessment that's 75% complete will be finished within the next few months. However, that won't put us in that grant cycle, and so we will be waiting till next year, 2026, to apply for that funding for the vulnerability assessment.
Right. So just to kind of summarize things. So 9 projects, about $120 million worth. About how many homes do you figure were affected by that?
About 700 homes.
700 homes, $120 million. That is the long range plan for these projects, because one of them, the Pepper Hill Madeline, has a second phase to put a pump in at a pond. That's second phase. That's probably not going to happen for about 8 years, I was told. So we got a lot of time, in between all of that. And so I think it's super important that we talk about where we're going to go as a city, as a county, in terms of how we're going to dig out of this. How are we going to survive this? We talked about the last podcast about the humanistic side of this and how people are kind of going through the stages of anger. And, I think a lot of people are in this acceptance stage now of, okay, great. I woke up on Wednesday morning and it looks like the city's going to take care of my neighborhood, or at least they're thinking about me anyway. So I can take a breath and I can maybe start work on mitigating. I can start working about mitigating for the future. What can I do to keep my house from flooding?
This is a huge plan for the city of Port Orange. This is what residents need to see. There's 9 stormwater plans that have the potential to save hundreds of homes.
Right. And so, in the meantime, though, residents are still wondering, what do I do? And so I just wanted to mention this program. There is a very active organization in Volusia County. It's called Community Organizations Active in Disaster. And it has actually been in place for many, many years. It's all about businesses, faith groups, civic groups, individuals, government agencies that basically address the unmet needs prior to and during and following a disaster. So the goal here is to coordinate volunteers and resources. They kind of fill the gaps that come about when, customary emergency agencies cannot fit the needs of the community. And so they're coming up with a program, and this just was basically just unveiled at the last meeting. Community Organizations Active in Disaster are hoping to put together a program called Neighbors Helping Neighbors, right? And so it's important that we work together inside our communities. Each one of these developments are having problems. Find the leaders that want to help a neighbor that maybe needs, just assistance with evacuation needs, or where do I put my pet? How do I go about keeping my furniture off the ground? Just the real small basic things that people need to survive a storm, right? So this is the direction that I'm sort of passionate about,
So we want to find community leaders. We want to try to pick out people from these neighborhoods to advocate for their community, for their specific part of their neighborhood.
Right. So, for instance, I know that there is a Facebook page. Right, that's started in some of these areas, Willow Run, Sugar Forest, trying to encourage people to get together as a community, make sure we all know who flooded, who didn't flood, what you can do to help your neighbor that flooded because you didn't flood, and if you've lived this, which, by the way, I know that Commissioner Foley has actually lived the nightmare because he's flooded twice. He understands this. He understands that we need to come together as a neighborhood and be able to mitigate before and after the storm. So we need to be more positive about this. Move forward and try and be more positive about preparing for the future. I'm all about preparing. That's basically, that was my career, is proper planning. Okay. So this is the direction that I feel the need to go, as well as, of course, keeping our city commissioners on top of things, keeping them accountable, making sure they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's on all these grants and permits and planning and designs that are going on.
I really appreciate the tone of the meeting because it seemed that county members really took on that perspective that these homes are people's livelihoods. I think is a shift from past months prior.
I think they were sympathetic. I think it was just a lot of empathy was there at this meeting, and I think it could be felt in the audience. And I think that's important to mention because it didn't begin that way. In October, people were screaming at the podium, myself included, and we were upset and we were mad, and definitely we were blaming the city for a lot of this. And you know what? It's 2025. 1970, 80, 90 was a long time ago. And yes, we have to move forward. And, I'm one of those people, I'm an optimistic and looking at the cup half full, not half empty. And so I think you and I are on the same page with that. We want to try and keep this positive, keep as much educational resources moving forward as we can. And so one of the things that was mentioned by Mayor Stiltner, and as this goes for every city in Volusia County, you need to contact your constituents, certainly your county chair, your representatives, your Congress. It's very, very important, as expressed in that meeting, that you put an email out there and go ahead and send it and talk to your neighbor and work together to try and get the funding, because realistically, unless we're looking at a tax increase or a special stormwater assessment increase, we most likely will be looking at that throughout the county to be able to fund these projects. So, hang on, because that's getting ready to happen. So you need to go ahead and start working on, every city pretty much gives out a list of who the constituents are that you need to contact.
Yeah, it's a big deal that the city's come forward and has partnered with Kimley Horn to come
Right.
up with these design plans. I like the approach that they took. They really used data-driven decisions to make the models and to make the outputs and predictions. I appreciate that they took a conservative approach.
Yeah. I still need to remember and respect that there are a lot of people that are flooding that are not part of these plans. Okay. There are still people in neighborhoods. It might be a 1 or 2 home situation, a handful of homes in Willow Run affected by the B12, some flooding over on Riverside. Not everybody is going to benefit from these particular plans.
But everybody can be of help to one another when you talk about, creating community organization.
Yeah.
Just because your home didn't flood doesn't mean you cannot act as yourself a resource. There's little things that can be done as well as, big 9 projects.
And so, back to that couple of homes here that are not going to be affected by a multi-million-dollar plan. That's what Elevate Florida is all about. Okay. If you are in that neighborhood and you are flooding and you are not part of one of these proposed plans, you better get your application in to Elevate Florida, because I believe mid-April is when that is going to shut down. I'm not positive on that date. They might extend it, but you need to get yourself involved with that program, figure out a way to fund it, figure out how to get a grant to help with your part of that 25% part. Because you're basically, you're backed in a corner. You're backed in a corner. They're not going to, all of these plans aren't going to help everybody. So the city is either going to help you with your application for Elevate Florida. There are ways they can assist you with uploading documents and whatnot. I know a neighbor of mine is getting help from the city as well. And so you need to know that if you're not affected by these proposed plans, please consider the Elevate Florida program or the acquisition of land or the reconstruction of your home. That's kind of the category that I'm fitting in myself right now, because there's people all around me that are elevating and buying out. So there are options, and here they are. We're telling you about them. So go for it. What do you think, Sarah?
Well,
it's a lot of information.
We just want to point you to the City of Port Orange's website. You can find that stormwater master plan from Tuesday night's meeting. It is a great way to get all the information you need. They'll be having 9 additional stormwater meetings that'll really tailor to each neighborhood.
Right.
Just going back to Tuesday night's meeting.
Yeah.
If there's questions about your neighborhood that you're seeking answers for, I know that they'll go more in depth with individual neighborhood workshops, but phenomenal job done by city engineer and council members to really take a step in the right direction and give the city some empowerment and some peace of mind that in the next decade changes are going to be coming, because let's be real, right? $120 million worth of projects.
Right.
We've got a long road ahead of us to secure that funding and to get these projects underway. However, there are things that we will be discussing in our upcoming episodes that you can do now to help mitigate at the home level.
Right. And, let's just continue to focus on saving our city, the old and the new.
Yes, you can find us on Facebook at Volusia County Uncovered. Please give us a like and a follow. Please share this information with your neighbors, your friends. Volusia County Uncovered is an informational resource that we want residents to be able to come to and seek out those answers that they're looking for. So I thank you so much, Lori, for joining me today.
Great. Have a good day. I'd like to do a shout out, though, for Alec Ferguson over here. He is our podcast engineer, and I just want to do a shout out to Alec Ferguson. Thanks, Alec. All right.
Thank you, Alec, for everything you do and helping us produce this show.
Adios.